You should have audio now. Anyway, I live just south of Cambridge, about 30 miles out. And I keep my air bike currently over at Kiwani at the airport. There, I have a hangar, and but I do have a 500-foot strip here right behind the house. I've landed there occasionally. It's kind of an uphill with a barn and some trees in the way there, so I try to pick the days when I can land calm from the south going to the north and then turn around and take off the other direction. I always fear that the engine's going to quit on me. But what I'm here to talk about tonight is the Sport Performance Aviation Panther. They introduced this in 2013 up at Oshkosh. To date, they've sold well over 125 kits in various configurations. I had Paul Kierick come with me up at Oshkosh over to their booth and talk to them, and I had Paul go over their design from nose to tail and in and out, upside down and everywhere. And he kind of gave me the green light that he thought the design was well thought out and doable. So I was buyer number 2. And but I'm a slow builder. I kind of put things off in the summertime because I'm so busy outside that most of my building is relegated to the winter months. Unfortunately, this winter I had to finish off another room in the basement trying to get the house done. So I've just now kind of gotten back into it. Sport Aviation was started by, it's a family operation. Dan and Rachel Wiesman. They live at Holler Air Park, just about 10 miles from their factory, which is in Green Cove Springs, Florida. That's in the St. Pete, St. Augustine area, so they're up in the northeast corner of Florida. The Panther is and I'll show you some other pictures here. Dan built the prototype, which we saw in the first picture. This is another member of the Holler Air Park community. His name is Bob Woolley, and he built the proof of concept, the beta. He was a beta builder, and he built this beautiful airplane. It's truly amazing looking. And I have another story about Bob. I met him up at Oshkosh. Just a gentleman all the way around, retired Air Force fighter pilot. This is another picture of his bird up at Oshkosh. There was a second beta builder. I knew I'd forget his name. But anyway, he's from Georgia, Tony Spicer. And Tony built the second proof of concept. So there were three airplanes actually built before they went into kit production.
Did the second flight on it and has been flying it ever since. I believe he's now the fleet.
That's me, isn't it? In there.
500 hours at this time, I'm guessing.
These are a few more pictures of completed Panthers.
Some other versatility, and that there's some crossover between the two models. The wings.
They have a nose dragger version if you're so inclined. Most of them are I'm sorry. Most of them are. I don't know how to get out of that now. Okay.
You can see if you've been reading down through the specs while I was talking.
Crap.
It does have more wing area. Lighter empty weights are mainly due
give me a sec.
The gross weight to meet the stall speed of 45 knots clean for the LSA rule is 1,115 pounds. That's not really the structural limit.
I need to stop that audio. I'm sorry.
Pretty well described in our operating limits. But, and those are found.
That's actually Dan talking on a video in the background there.
Found on the website. Our builder's main lift is open.
Oh, let's see.
So you can go find those there.
There we go. My apologies. And that's what an unpainted Panther looks like. The rest is all aluminum. I'm going to focus tonight not so much on the entire build, but on the wing tanks. They give you a full set of plans, a full-size drawing, and you take some medium density fiberboard. I screwed mine together, glued the plans to it, cut it out on the bandsaw so that they were identical pieces. Kept everything as square and true as I could. And then I took apart an old pool table at one time, and this is a slate out of that pool table. You can see where the pockets used to be. Most slates are in 3 pieces, unless you get one of those small bar room type coin machines, and those are 1 piece because they can set them up quick and dirty. But anyway, I built on this, and with the idea that it was going to keep things absolutely where I want them to be, without any twist or. Because sometimes your work table, if it's wood and your floor is uneven, you might not know that it's not even, but you could actually build a twist into something. So that using that solid piece of slate helped ensure that I was building a quality part when I was done. When you get it in the jig, you start out putting your wing skin in, and part of the drawings, they showed you where to make a mark on each one of these sides. When you've got the top of your skins down to that mark on both sides, you've got your tank seated all the way down and where it needs to be to build the profile they want. And I will pass these around if I don't trip on these. One of the things I came up with to not mar the aluminum skin, the winter before, it's one of my projects again in the basement, I laid down a laminate floor. And some of that laminate flooring has a rubber backing if you buy the good stuff. And I cut these little clamping blocks out of that with the rubber against the aluminum. That way my clamps didn't mar or dent the aluminum skin. And you know, you can find this stuff everywhere. You can go to Menards and get samples if you want to make a couple cheapies. But I've got stuff left over for my project. If you need it, I got it. It worked out really well. This is the tank fully assembled in the jig before it gets pro-sealed. The nice thing about the jig and the slate, you can turn the tank one side to the other or set it upright, and it's always going to be square. This is my setup before I started pro sealing. I covered everything with paper because that stuff is worse than COVID. It'll get on anything. But everything, you know, preparation is everything. I could do a whole thing about pro sealing, but how many guys have done it? Actually, okay. It's nice, isn't it? It's fun. You use a special rivet on this particular design. They used a pulled rivet. It's not a driven rivet. And it's a closed end rivet. In other words, if you look at a regular pop rivet, so to speak, it'll be open on both ends with the mandrel in the middle. And liquids could leak through it. But you get a special closed end rivet. One end is closed off with the mandrel inside. And when you pull it, it pulls the rivet down, but it's still sealed on the inside. So that, combined with dipping it in Pro Seal, provides you a pretty good seal. And then you go back after you've got it riveted, and then you coat the entire seam with more Pro Seal. My biggest fear was having a leak. I mean, it gave me nightmares. But if you follow the recommendations and do what everything they tell you to do, it will work. Cleanliness is next to godliness when it comes to using that stuff. You really get your metal clean. Don't let it sit around. Get right to it, and you'll get a good seal. This is the wing jig that I've had set up in the garage. It's a construction adhesive glued to these blocks are glued to the floor. There's no screws or anything, but the construction adhesive held it, and then it's screwed to the ceiling. You square everything up. You get your spar in there. You get your spar level, and then make sure there's no twist in it. And then you start adding your ribs, put on your skins, drill it, up drill it, deburr it. You take it apart, put it together dozens of times. And then you use straps to pull the skin down and rivet it in place. The tank is just sitting there right now. It's not riveted on. you have two options. You can rivet it on solidly, or you can use removable screws. Either way, if you got to take the tank off, you're going to screw up the paint, so I'm going to just rivet mine on. The reason it's not riveted on yet is because when you go to mount the wing into the fuselage, there's some adjustments there that you have to make, and it's much easier to get to those adjustment mechanisms without that tank present. There's no problem going back later and adding the tank after you get the wings rigged. This is some more of my Pro Seal setup. There I've started to put in the ribs with all the sealant. This allows the fuel to go from chamber to chamber, but it keeps it from sloshing around too badly. They're baffles basically. Ribs and baffles combined.
And there's just that one hole, Ron, for the fuel to go?
Yeah, it's a pretty good size hole. Okay. You're not going to run out of fuel. This is the overflow nipple. Later, I don't know if I got a picture of it or not, but there's a tube that runs through all these holes here to the far end of the tank, because that's the high point of the tank. If your tanks get overfilled and then sit out in the hot sun, it'll push that fuel out that overflow and onto the ground. If you've been up to Oshkosh and smelled gas, it's usually from the tanks were just recently filled by Basler, then that sits in the hot sun, and pretty soon you got a couple ounces of gas coming out. This is the pickup for the fuel itself. They use a quick disconnect that they adopted from the racing industry, the auto racing industry. So if you build the the removable wing option, you just get in there and just uncouple it. You pull the wing out a few inches, uncouple it. You might drop a drop or two of fuel on the ground, but it shuts off that quick. So you can still take the wings off with fuel in the tank. This is where the ascending unit goes. One thing I learned was cut the rim off of your paper plate if that's what you're using, and then tape that sucker down. Then you can mix it, and you hold something with one hand and mixing stick with the other hand and put it on your parts. And I think a lot of trouble guys have when they get Pro Seal everywhere, it's because this thing is moving around on them and they got to put their hand over there, and pretty soon you got a mess. So that really helped out in keeping control on that where that Pro Seal went. I didn't know how to keep this is your pickup arm that sits in the lowest part of the tank. And it's aluminum tube that's got some slots cut in it. And that's what picks up your fuel. And I thought, man, I got to Pro Seal all that in there. How am I going to keep that from sealing up those slots? So I took a rubber glove and cut the finger off and put it over there and taped it. And that stayed on there until I was done with the tanks. That's just another interior shot of the tanks. There's your fuel gauge, Stewart Warner gauge that they recommend. And that's the low position. Come on. And the high position. Oopsie, oopsie. I'm as good with computers as what's your name again?
Yeah, John.
John.
Sorry, John.
Okay.
Come on. Well, bless my soul. Okay, this is the interesting part. When you pressure test your tank, you got to have some way to put the air in. So they've got a McMaster car part that they want you to order, which I always hate paying postage for stuff. So I went to the farm store, and this is actually a stem that goes into a tractor, the big tractor tires on the back of a tractor. And they rely on that rubber O-ring to seal up. That screws into another stem, so it's kind of like two stems and one that comes out of the tire. And I thought, hey, I'm going to use those. So I went and bought two of them for my tanks. And I'll come back to that in a minute. And that's what the Schrader valve seated into the pickup. And that's the drain tube or the drain valve that will be in there later for draining your tanks and checking for water. And I think that part of it is about it. If I can close this out. And we'll close this out. Now the Panther, this is off their website. Actually, this is from the forum that they did with Oshkosh. They did a forum, one of those 1.5 hour deals. The Panther LS and the Panther Sport. The Panther LS is light sport legal, if you keep the throttle retarded, depending on what engine you put in. It has a 23.5 foot wingspan, 93 square feet, 650 to 750 pounds empty weight, depending on engine, and a gross weight of 1,115 pounds. So it's got a pretty good gross weight for a single seat airplane. 27 gallons of fuel, 180 to 120 horsepower, and I'll get into the engine choices later. Top speed of 140 to 150, VNE 200, plus 6 minus 3. The Panther Sport, which cannot be made LS legal, is a little bit shorter. They cut a foot off each wing, 21 feet 5, 85 square feet, a little faster landing speed, 650 to 875 pounds gross, empty weight I mean, with 1,210 gross. Still the 27 gallon tanks. You can make a smaller tank if the guys want to put a smoke system in. They'll tell you to close off one of those bays in your fuel tank and put your smoke in there, your smoke fuel in that, smoke oil. Top speed 160 to 200 with a VNE of 220. 6 plus 3 negative.
What's the difference, Ron, in the stall speed?
You know, there's so many engine choices, and but it's all within LSA limits. It's yes.
What did you say the cruise speed was again?
Cruise speed. Top speed. I don't have cruise up here. Top is 140 to 180 or 160 to 200, depending on which version you build. Some of it strengthened that bonding and riveting. They warn you not to hang the engine on it unsupported if you don't have the skins already bonded to that welded cage. Yeah, the landing gear is fully machined when you get it, 7075 T6, which is a little more corrosive than some of the other aluminum, so I had to protect those and spray them and get them all covered. The kit now includes all the hardware. The kit now, the base kit is $20,000. When I jumped in with serial number 2, I think I give them $1,150. So, but now they include the hardware kit, so that bumps it up. You know, I had to pay a little more to get my kit, but I still think I got a pretty good deal by getting in early.
How many years ago was that?
That was 2013 when I sent in my order, and it arrived probably just before 2014.
Ron, what made you decide this over one of the comparable RVs?
Yeah, money mostly.
Okay.
Yeah, the RVs are pricey. I mean, we got this situation now with the RV-12 in this kids building program that by the time they get it built, they end up selling it for less than what was in the, to build the thing. So, I was trying to find something that was easy to build, single seat, because I very seldom fly with 2 people. I looked at the Zenith 750, and I kind of attended one of their quick build things they do at Oshkosh, and I just thought it was a little too flimsy. This thing looked very robust to me, and that steel cage was a real seller. The other thing that's nice is the fuel's in the wing tanks. There's no fuel except for the fuel lines that run through the cockpit. So if you have an upset, you're not going to be drenched in fuel, I hope. I also looked at Sonex, but I wasn't really too turned on by that long sloping windshield. And
Yeah, it's got such a distinctive design. Either
Yeah.
like that or you don't.
it's a good performer if you want to go with a Corvair or a Volkswagen engine or a Jabiru. But
And cheap. I mean, it's affordable.
yeah,
It looks good as a jet.
It does look good. It looks better as a jet.
I did look at the 1X. That was kind of interesting, a little airplane. But again, that was really small. It almost looked like a toy to me. When I came across the Panther, I lost my mind and decided that's the one. Okay. Let's see. Panther engine options. The Titan 320 or 340. Lycoming 233, 235 or 320. Continental 200 or 240. Also some guys are putting UL power in, the 350. One guy even went to 520. That's going to be a rocket. The Jabiru 3300s was very popular. And a lot of guys built Corvairs in the 3 liter and the 3.3 liter version. To build a Corvair engine today, if you use Dan also sells a forged crank for it, you're probably looking in the neighborhood of 15 to 16,000 to get a viable engine up and running. So that kind of, you know, back when William Wynn, if you're familiar with William Wynn, he was promoting a lot of Corvair builds for airplanes like the Peyton Pole. But this thing has evolved to the point where it's a good engine. It's a smooth running engine because it's 6 cylinders. But I think most of these, if we looked hard enough, we could probably find a mid-time 0235 for about 10 grand, 10, 11 grand. Which that might be the way I go. I've got an 0200 sitting there that needs to be tore down and gone through, and I figured by the time I get that much money in it, I probably have a, you know, like new engine, but it's still going to be quite a bit of money. I thought maybe I could just sell the Corvair or the Continental as a core engine, get a few bucks out of that, sell all the Corvair parts I've got laying around, and then help finance the 0235. There was another, if I can find it. There was a neat picture, and I forgot to put down the time marker where that was at. Anyway, it shows a picture of the spar loaded with 1,600 pounds of sandbags, and the spar, they took it past 10 and a half G's, and the spar still wouldn't fail. It buckled a few ribs, but the spar held together. So, and that was another interesting part of the build, was actually riveting the spar together. It uses a fairly large 3/8 rivet throughout, and it was kind of one of the blocking points in my build. I just was afraid to tackle it. But then they developed a rivet squeezer that you could borrow from them free of cost. All you had to do is pay the shipping to and from. And basically it uses a hand pump and cylinder, and it squeezes together in a special C-frame, and you just go from rivet to rivet to rivet, and you crank it down X number of turns until you get the right dimension with your checker, and you remember how many pumps that took, and you move to the next one. You release the pressure, it springs back apart, you move to the next one, you bring the pump up to where you feel a little resistance, so you know you're bottomed out on the fresh rivet, and then you go 5 more pumps if that's what it took, 5 more pumps. And actually once you get going on it, it really goes well. I did have a few problems where by the time I got it, it had some wear and tear on it, and the rivet set would be, if you got it just off a few angles or something, that rivet would kind of kick off to one side or another. I would notice that right away. I would back it off. I'd take a little hammer and tap that rivet back straight, and then go back and reset it again. And I didn't have any problems. Now, just this past winter, they have completely rebuilt their rivet squeezer, because he admitted it was giving problems to guys that were having trouble with these rivets going off center. And he says it's even better now, it's even easier to use. So they do have a kind of what the fast build kit. I don't know if I don't have that figure here, but it's an extra $2,000 if they build the spars for you. And I figure I learned something by using their spar riveter, and I can do that myself. And they turned out beautiful. I mean, I was really proud of my spars, and I saved $2,000. And if you want them to build your wing tanks for you, the 2 wing tanks, that's another $1,600 bucks. So I really looked at that really hard, because The only way to fix a leak in these things is to cut a new access hole where the leak is and go in and seal it and then reseal your new access hole. No fun. And I sweated bullets over that. I'll move over to here. Now when it came time to pressure test these, you have to seal off your fuel pickup, in which they recommend you use an AN cap that fits these. Well, I didn't have one, and being the tight ass that I am, I didn't want to order one through the mail and pay more for shipping than, pardon my French, more for shipping than what the cap cost. So I think I talked to Jim Smith about that, and he kind of come up with the idea of using a piece of aluminum or copper. In that case, you could solder it shut, but I used aluminum. And then after I squeezed the end shut, flared the other end, I put a little bit of epoxy down in there and let that set, and that tube is sealed up now. So once it holds air, no problem. The other problem when I finally got around to testing it was I had a leak, and my heart sank to my ankles. I thought, oh man, it's just not holding pressure. And the way you check it, you know, I'll get back to this in a second, is you get everything set up. Where's my board? Clear back there. Adam, hang on, buddy. This is the way they recommend you build it in the build manual. Get yourself a mammometer. Did I say that right? Anyway, you fill it with a fluid. Now, I left my original at home, so I had to make a quick trip to Menards tonight and get all this stuff. But it's here. And hopefully this will work because I don't have a hose clamp. That got left at home too with the original. And I filled it with root beer. So that colored liquid is root beer. Anyway, once you get that set up, they recommend you put a little Teflon paste around the threads to seal it, which I did. And they want you to go to 1 pound of pressure, which is going to be about 13 inches. And you very carefully until you get to about 13 inches, and that gives you 1 atmosphere. And then you kind of let it settle down because that tank is kind of moving a little bit. And you take your pencil and you make a mark there and you walk away if it's holding. And you come back 24 hours later, and if it's still at that mark, you've got good tanks. Unfortunately for me, as soon as I brought that pressure up, that level, it started going, and my heart was going with it. Turned out that fitting that goes in there, that Schrader valve, is a straight thread 3/8. And your drain valve is tapered, pipe thread, Jim, and it's a 1/64 bigger. And that would not seal with just paste. I had to pull it back out, wrap Teflon tape around it 3 or 4 times to build it up, put it back in, and then it would hold air. So I did all that, went back and did this again, stood there and watched it, and it went, well, it was the gas cap. It's adjustable. You can increase or decrease the amount of grip it has, and that O-ring wasn't quite sitting as tight as it could, and once I gave it a couple turns and then put it back on, it held. So it did that both tanks. My heart dropped both times, but they're good. Once I got those cured, I have no more leaks, so I'm very happy with that. So that's about it. If you'd like to see more pictures of my build, I can bring them in another meeting and show you the tail cone and the wings as they're built and all that. But it's pretty straightforward if you've ever built an aluminum airplane. But that's how I tested my tanks. And I was each one of these rivets was dipped in the sealant before it went in. And after it kind of halfway cures, you go back and with some mild solvent, remove that excess sealant, so it's not a dirty looking tank. But
Ron, I got a question.
yes,
Or there,
The other John.
the other John.
So is that also sloshed sealed inside?
no, no. That would make the tanks really heavy, I think, because there's so many corners in this thing to where, you know, that stuff could accumulate. That I don't think any, I don't know, RV builders, they don't slosh their tanks, do they? No, I didn't think so.
I know Ron was so specific on his build. He ordered a in and out reamer.
Yeah,
One of the things I learned when I went over with Jim to inspect some of his, look at his build, was that special reamer that would go in, it would ream the inside of the hole and the outside of the hole in the same
Yeah.
process.
it would ream going in a little bit, it's spring loaded, and then after you make a couple rounds, you don't want to take too much metal off because you can chew it down in a hurry. And you push it through, that cutter drops down inside the shaft of the reamer. When you get inside your structure, it springs back open, and then you back it out a couple turns and then pull it all the way out.
You did every one of those,
Oh yeah.
you did every one of those holes with that in and out reamer.
The place
Specific.
the place it was most beneficial was when you put the skins to the steel structure. You want to get that burr on the inside of that welded steel cage done.
So it'll,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that not only the skin fits tight, but the backside of that rivet is tight. If you got a burr in there, you could end up having kind of a loose rivet, and you don't want that, especially when you get some of your strength from that stressed skin.
any other questions for Ron?
Is the skin of the tank, is that the external skin of the wing? as
Yes.
well?
Yep.
Nothing on top of it?
Yep. There's just a single layer. I think it's 0.25 is the thickness of the wing skins on the inner panel, and then the outer half, to save a little weight, they went to 0.20. And again, it's all 60-61 T6.
You learn anything, Chris, on your build compared to what Ron's done, or?
I haven't gotten into the wings yet.
I know you had a riveting problem where you were hoping there was some special machine that would reach deep and do rivets, right? Or
Yeah, I
something.
actually found one.
Oh, you did?
Yep.
Okay, all right. We didn't have one in the crib, tool crib. but-
As soon
I
as
will-
I'm done with my build, they'll have one in the crib.
I will tell you about one thing that kind of had me baffled for a while, and that over a 24-hour period, we can get some really big barometric pressure swings.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you.
And temperature swings. I've got a heated garage, but it was cold when I went out there. I'd turn the heat up, I'd start to do my test on it, and then the room would warm up and the pressure would come up, and the room would get cold when I come back later, and the pressure went down below my mark. So I'd turn the heat back up, and sure enough, that would come back up, and it was cold and go back down again. I thought, well, that's just something you got to be prepared for. The other thing is we had one heck of a front come through, and it was such a change in barometric pressure that it pushed all that liquid out and up the top of the tube. I had maybe just this much liquid left in the bottom. And I thought, now my tube's leaking. But it was that big front that came through. It just pushed that much pressure, it, you know, squeezed the tank that much that it forced that out of there. Big wet spot on the floor, but. And that originally I used this RV antifreeze that you can get, you know, it's pink, you know, so it doesn't hurt anything on the floor and that. Root beer would make a mess. And you'd have ants. So that's it, guys. Hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah.